Hi, I'm Ben Felder with the Oklahoman, and joining me is David Duvall, the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Education Association. David, thanks so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
And it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation, a story that I'm taking a look at explores House Bill 1017, Education Reform Act of 1990, that brought a series of tax increases for funding increases for public schools across the state, as well as a lot of reform measures. The genesis of that Reform Act came from a state of low teacher salaries, low academic performance, and just a lack of general education funding. A lot of the same situations that we're dealing with today here in the state. And so I wanted to bring you in here because this is something that you know quite a bit about. Back in 1990, you were with OEA and were a part of teachers gathering at the Capitol to advocate for this legislation. First off, what do you remember about the state of education back in 1990 here in Oklahoma?
I remember it very well. Oklahoma education had dropped similar to the position we are now. We were at the bottom of the country. I think we were ranked 48th in both teacher salaries and per pupil expenditures at that time. And the teachers were very frustrated. Parents were concerned about their children. And so the Oklahoma Education Association led an effort to address those issues at the state government level. We had a governor at the time, Henry Bellman, who had in fact been the first Republican governor in Oklahoma history back in the 60s, and then went on to a distinguished career in the U.S. Senate before retiring from the U.S. Senate and coming back to serve as governor once again. Well-respected Republican. Both houses of the legislature were controlled by Democrats at the time. And so together, the governor and the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate decided to do something to address these issues, and they created a blue ribbon panel made up of business leaders, teachers, superintendents, school board members, parents from all walks of life in Oklahoma, rural, urban, Republican, Democrat, to come together and develop some common sense solutions to the issues we were facing, and they issued a report. That report became the legislation that was 1017 that then the legislature had to deal with. And what happened was that it passed the House and Senate, but then failed to get enough votes for the emergency clause in the Senate, and which would effectively have killed it. So the Oklahoma Education Association called for a statewide teacher demonstration to reinforce with the legislature the importance of passing House Bill 1017 and creating these reforms and a revenue stream to implement it. And that led to the 4 days in April of 1990, which led to the passage of House Bill 1017.
Yeah, one of the fascinating things about doing research on this was seeing some of the photos and videos from those demonstrations at the Capitol. Thousands of teachers, schools closed across the state as teachers gathered here to express their support for this. What do you remember just about the environment at the Capitol there with teachers with this frustration and trying to communicate that to legislators?
Well, it was incredibly energizing. The OEA was working with the School Board Association, with the PTA, with the cooperative school administrators, and to bring people to the Capitol to exercise their civic responsibilities to ask their legislators to pass this. And the first day was a Monday, and we didn't know at the time how many of our members, how many parents, how many students, who would show up. And so I was standing on the steps of the Capitol. I had the microphone in my hand to welcome people there, and suddenly buses started rolling in and cars started rolling in and people started marching. And we didn't know whether we'd get 100 people or 1,000 people, but then thousands showed up. And to rally and to implore their legislators to do what was right for the schools. And then the second day, even more thousands showed up. And the third day, even more thousands showed up. And we'd walk around, we completely encircled the Capitol in a march, and it was in a drizzling rain and kind of a cold. You know how weather is in Oklahoma in April, but it was terribly exciting and energizing to see so many Oklahomans joining together to exercise their right and go to the government and say, here's what we need for our schools. We need you to do what's right for our children today.
Yeah, part of that video, looking back, when the vote is announced that it passed, the celebration amongst the teachers. So this was a combination of tax increases to pump more money into education. It was also new standards, including caps on class sizes, academic performance. What was just the feeling in public education not just right after that vote, but in the years to come about this effort? I mean, what things did seem to have changed?
Well, there was a great hopeful feeling. As I said, these were all common sense measures. And rather than what we see so often, which is unfunded mandates that are handed down either from the federal or the state government on schools, this had a revenue stream of resources to help implement the common sense changes that it called for. In a 5-year, it was roughly $230 million was raised, a broad range of tax increases, a 1% increase on individual income tax, as I recall, 1% increase on corporate income tax, and I think a half-cent sales tax increase. So broad-based, everybody was then participating in the funding. And again, common sense. We all knew that in order to have strong public schools, you had to have the best and brightest, competent, caring, certified teachers in the classrooms. So in order to attract those people, it increased the salaries. Over a 5-year period, it was a phased-in over a 5-year period, there was a $9,000 increase in teacher salaries. It also realized that you had to have small enough class sizes so that it was the opportunity for teachers to work individually with students. So it set class size limits of 20 students in elementary levels and no more than 140 students in an instructional day for secondary teachers. So again, there was great hope that, that we were finally doing something to make a difference for teachers and students in the learning environment in our schools in Oklahoma.
Yeah, I've talked to several teachers who were teaching at that time who kind of saw that immediate impact. Class sizes were smaller. The average teacher pay in Oklahoma went from next to last to, I think, in the high 30s within a few years. But these are obviously issues that now seem to be back in Oklahoma. Over the past, 26 years, a long time, what's changed? A lot of these mandates were done away with. The cap, the classroom cap, has been done away with. What's kind of just, what's been that reason for that change, and why hasn't 1017 appeared to stick, even though we are still, it's still a funding mechanism for schools?
Yeah, well, one of the problems is it was a 5-year phase-in, but you have to continue to make improvements and investments in education. You can't just stop after 5 years, and in fact, we've rolled back many of those things. In that first 5 years, the salaries increased by $9,000 in Oklahoma. In the ensuing 20 years since that, there's been a $9,000 increase. So clearly, that momentum that was started stopped. The taxes that were increased, they were rolled back. So the funding that was being provided has stopped. The class size limits are no longer in effect. They're no longer being enforced. And so all of those common sense ideas that were working in the initial phases have been rolled back, and now instead what we generally see is either the federal government or the state government imposing ideological issues on schools that actually cost us money, take away from classroom time, and are not adequately funded. And we're in a position now similar to where we were in 1990, a huge level of frustration on the part of teachers and students and parents because what's happening. Every student in Oklahoma deserves a great public school. And we need to go back to those times where we can work together as business leaders and teachers and superintendents and school board members and parents and come up again with the common sense solutions to the issues our schools are facing. You know, in 26 years, Oklahoma's changed a lot.
Yeah.
Our demographics have changed a lot. Our student population has changed a lot. The challenges that teachers face on a daily basis are more daunting today than they were back then. And we need support from Oklahoma and our legislature to adequately address those issues with common sense solutions.
But, you know, what do you see as maybe the key going forward for Oklahoma to maybe solve some of these problems that they find themselves in with their schools?
Well, I'll go back to one of the things that Governor Bellman did back then was create this commission, this blue ribbon panel, bringing people from all walks of life who have interests, who are stakeholders in our education system, to look at what we've got and come up with common sense solutions that were a consensus idea. That would be a good start. I don't know that tax increases are off the table. Oklahomans have repeatedly voted for funding for their schools. There's an initiative petition being circulated now that is well on its way to being approved and being placed on the ballot. Oklahomans are willing to fund their schools adequately. Schools you go to any town in Oklahoma and the school is the center of the community. It holds that community together. I'm a product of Oklahoma public schools, Oklahoma City public schools, all the way through. And it is that sense of community that our public schools bring that Oklahomans embrace and want to see continued, and they're willing to fund it.
Yeah. Finally, what do you see as some of the lessons learned from 1017? I mean, is this effort that seemed to bring positive results initially, but as you said, kind of faded away over time? What are some of the key lessons looking back 26 years ago to what we can do today?
Well, one of the key lessons is bringing people together, not dividing them. Coming up and looking at issues and finding consensus answers, solutions, common sense solutions to those issues is one. Another is that our public schools, since the birth of America, our public schools have been central to building America into the nation it is today, that has productive citizens, that has a growing economy. So we need to make sure that we protect that public education system, and that isn't something that happens with one bill that's enacted by the legislature. It requires constant work and constant ideas to meet the changing needs of a changing demographic in our schools. So it requires constant nurturing to make our schools what we want them to be as a state.
Yeah, well, education obviously kind of a challenging topic. It was 26 years ago, it is today. David, thank you so much for your time and looking back at that measure.
Ben, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks.
Thank you.